Warm greetings to one and all present. It is indeed a great honor for me to welcome all our esteemed panelists and audience members to the 28th Convergence India and the 6th Smart Cities India Expo, organized by Exhibitions India Group and the India Trade Promotion Organization. The fourth and final session under our virtual Clean and Water India Summit is titled Innovative Solutions and Technologies to Tackle Asia's Recurring Air Pollution, Prevention and Cure. Joining us today on the panel for this session are Professor S.N. Tripathi, HEG Professor, Department of Civil Engineering, IIT Kanpur, Ms. Bharti Singla, COO and Founder, Chakra Innovation, Dr. Jorge Sousa, Researcher, R&D at Vito, and Dr. Peter Harp, Chairman and Founder, ID TechX. Mr. Ashish Sachdeva, President and Founder, Green Dream Foundation, and now that this session is being streamed on our Facebook page, that is @IoT India Expo. And of course, the visitors who are attending our physical event at Pragati Maidan, New Delhi can also watch this session live via our official event app Swapcard. I also request all our esteemed speakers to kindly keep their microphone on mute when it is not in use to ensure complete clarity and no disturbance during the session. Also, the last few minutes of the session will be utilized for the Q&As. Professor Tripathi, I now hand over the proceedings to you.
Thank you, Kushagra. And let me share my presentation. So, I believe I am clearly audible and my presentation is visible in presentation mode. Correct?
Yes, sir, it is.
Okay. So thanks for giving me this opportunity. I work at IIT Kanpur and I'm also closely associated with National Clean Air Program, which many of you know was launched in 2019, is a very ambitious federal program to cut down PM 2.5, that is particulate matters, by 1/3 by year 2024. And this program, which is now going to work in a mission mode since Honorable Prime Minister announced about this from the ramparts of Red Fort during last Independence Day. This works on three pillars, basically on monitoring and science, capacity building, and mitigation. And I'm going to touch upon all these three components in my talk in next few 10 minutes or so. So just to start with some of the alternative way of air quality monitoring I'm going to discuss here. We know that the existing way of doing the monitoring is very expensive and we have a huge gap because of the large resources involved with the current way of monitoring. So we have been working on sensor-based monitoring. What you see that we have developed a full end-to-end system which works on several kind of network protocol depending on the need. It can use either 4G or NB-IoT or 6LoWPAN, whether you want to apply that in city or in campus-like setting. And then the data what we get from sensors, be it PM 2.5 or ozone or NOx, some of the gases pollutants, we apply on-the-go calibration. So we have developed several calibrations models using machine learning and AI. And that data, of course, can be accessed through APIs. And then finally, the data can be seen through various apps, network, or through web page, etc. This is to just give you one example of such network, which has been deployed in Delhi NCR with the help of Ericsson. So this network has been operational since October 2020, and this has been relaying data, very accurate, stable data with 95% plus uptime across NCR. And building on this, we also have deployed a network which works on a different network technology, which doesn't require Wi-Fi to be connected with every sensor. and this has about 25 node sensor inside IIT Kanpur campus. And what you see that these are just a snapshot to give you an idea that what kind of data we are getting from this. This is basically a clear example of the collaborative effort which was led by IIT Kanpur and joined by many institutions, which was supported by ISSTF and DST. Further going on that, Maharashtra Pollution Control Board has come forward and commissioned a study. They are primarily interested in looking into the accuracy and stability of sensors. So they have given us access to their entire CEA QMS network, what I was talking about earlier, the current existing style of monitoring, which is very expensive, but that is very robust and very, very accurate. They have given us so that we can deploy these sensors across entire Mumbai, and we have done that. This experiment is on since November 1st and would complete by May 31st, and the data is very encouraging, and I can tell you the kind of data we are getting from that has been evaluated after applying calibrations, has been validated and evaluated against the EBAM, which is a equivalent reference grade monitor, and it is so promising that Maharashtra board is contemplating to scale the sensor based monitoring across the state of Maharashtra. This just to give you an example that one of the startups, these are all basically participated by startups. They have deployed their sensors. This is just to give you the current status of network in Mumbai deployed by one of the 4 participating startups. We have extended the sensor based idea to rural part of India. So what you see that Pradhan Mantri Ujjwala Yojana, which is a very ambitious flagship scheme of central government, where they want to replace the solid fuel by LPG so that the rural women health can be protected. Now, in order to evaluate the efficacy of this scheme, we have been commissioned to assess or evaluate PMUI across 6 states, which you see that has been shown by the red color, and we are deploying about 100 sensors across 12 villages in these 6 states, and this is very much going on, and hopefully we'll have some very, very interesting results to look into how well the rural women in particular, their health is responding to the LPG vis-a-vis when they were using solid fuel. Ericsson is quite enthused with the success of the sensor network we had in Delhi, and they have just commissioned with IIT Kanpur. We are leading it. That sensor network will be deployed in 3 more cities, that is in Gurugram, Hyderabad and Jaipur, and hopefully once MOUs are signed, this work will start from 1st of April this year, and this will continue for 3 years in these 3 cities. Now I will switch a little bit. I have talked about monitoring. I would now talk about how do you do mitigation. In order to mitigate sources, we need to identify and locate sources. This is one technique which we have been working on for some time with the support of Central Pollution Control Board, and this we call as a real-time source apportionment. Source apportionment is basically understanding the sources which contribute to PM2.5 at a receptor site or what you breathe. So this is the first time in the country we have brought together these set of 3 instruments which can characterize PM2.5 in real time. They can give you complete fingerprints, and using that fingerprint, we can invert it and can get what are the sources. And this has quite a lot of success, as I can just show you that starting with volatile organic compounds which are carcinogenic in nature, and they also convert into PM2.5. We have run this experiment in 2018, at two distinct sites in Delhi, one at IIT Delhi and other at Manorashna International University. The key findings from that, what you see, that one, we could clearly get 6 very distinct sources for them, and there are very different relative contribution. For example, at IIT Delhi, the heavy duty vehicles were contributing more, and during night time, when the restrictions which were generally put on them during daytime were lifted. So these kind of very, very subtle but significant information which is required by policymakers can be gotten, and in a short time, by real-time source apportionment, compared to traditional source apportionment which takes anywhere from 2 to 3 years, and in that time the policymakers can lose a lot of teeth to basically go after these sources and plug them. This is another example where a real-time metal-based source apportionment was done, and if you look in this view graph on the right, there are sets of metals, and each group actually give you a very different information, very unique information about sources. Using that information, we could actually gather that in Delhi there are 3 distinct pathways for the transport of pollution. So what you see in the right corner, there are 2 pathways which are coming from northwest, and the third that comes from the border of Uttar Pradesh and Nepal. And these 3 distinct transport pathways bring some very different kind of sources, and you can clearly identify what type of sources are actually sitting there, because each one of them carries some very different signatures. This is just to give you another example, the power of this method. What is shown here is the results from 3 distinct cities, one from Delhi, another for Beijing, and another from Polish city, Krakow. What you see here is that if you use 2 kind of parameters, one which is the ratio of PM2.5 to PM10, you know PM10 comes from mostly from natural sources, and PM2.5 comes from anthropogenic sources. So ratio of that can give you a lot of idea that whether the sources are anthropogenic or natural. And on the y-axis, it tells you once the particles are in the air, how much it gets enriched from the anthropogenic sources. And seeing or grouping all the metals in these 5 or across these 2 axes, you could consistently group them into these 5 broad category of sources. This has not been tried before, and you see that one can get these 5 types of sources which are natural, then emission or brake wear, wood burning, traffic and industry and combustion, and which actually runs quite well across these 5 cities. So it's a very, very useful information for policymakers, because these kind of data you literally get instantly. An example of that I can show you here, that last year, same time during lockdown, certainly the sources came, or they literally were operating at a very reduced intensity. So there was a lot of interest from the government and many others to understand that how the sources have changed across different phases of lockdown, and when the lockdowns were slowly changed, which basically were lifted. And what you see that during lockdown, because of these set of instrumentation which were operating and the subsequent technology what we had, we could provide a very intuitive and well validated information about sources. What you see that if you move from the top pie and you move clockwise, you could see that how during different phases of lockdown sources changed, and independent data actually verified it quite well. This is just to give you a very emerging result. Now we are trying this at the Uttar Pradesh Pollution Control Board in Lucknow. This is the result from December, and what you see that not only you get on the left what are these PM2.5 composed of, and this is only March, so within 1 month you can get this information. And on the right, what you see that what are the prominent sources which are contributing to PM 2.5, and on the right corner you could also get a time series of how the sources are contributing. This is very helpful, that if you look at the peak which contributes to episodes, you can literally go and intervene, plug the sources to save people's health. For example, if you look here, this is the December slide, and next one is the January slide, and there is a very distinct difference. You see the yellow part of the pie, of the pizza, has really increased here. There is a lot more biomass burning going on in January. These type of information you can get almost instantly in near real time, and that can strengthen health hands of regulator and other policymakers to save, of course, reduce pollution and save people's health. Finally, I will briefly touch upon the capacity building, what we are doing to contribute to the third pillar of National Clean Air Program. What you see that a knowledge network has been created as an advisory group to Central Pollution Control Board by the Government of India. This is very much basically constituted by Government of India. This is coordinated by IIT Kanpur. I am National Coordinator. This is the overall framework, and as I speak, there is an MOU going to be signed on day after tomorrow by the Honorable Environment, Forest and Climate Change Minister between the Institute of Repute, urban local bodies and State Pollution Control Board, so that at the city level, implementation of Clean Air Program can be made more effectively. Currently, one task was that to bring more institutes as a part of this knowledge network. We have been successful to bring 85 institutes who have certain level of capacity to contribute to National Clean Air Program. These are IITs, NITs, national laboratories, and other private and central universities. What you see that they are almost spread across all the states where the National Clean Air Program is being implemented, and they would have a tie-up with the local body, urban local body, which are called as a non-attendant city. So I will stop it here with the last slide, which tells you the structure and the role of IOR and National Knowledge Network. Thank you very much, and I'll be very happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Tripathi, for that enlightening presentation. Some very, very pertinent and very valid points in those PowerPoint slides. And if any of our fellow speakers have any questions for Professor Tripathi, they may ask them now or towards the end of the session. And then we can move to the next speaker. So I think we can carry on with the next speaker for now. Who would like to start now? Professor Dr. Harrod, Dr. Sosa?
I can go if that's, I can present our slides.
Sure.
I need the, do you see my presentation?
Yes, it is visible.
Okay, so yeah, actually it's quite interesting to follow up the talk before, because we are going to touch upon the use of sensor networks, and how we can use that actually to identify sources, pollution sources. So I'd like to start by explaining that I come from VITO. VITO is a Flemish research institute, and in particularly I come from the air quality modeling team, and our main focus is to assess air pollution levels at street scale. And I show you an example. I show you an example on the right of PM10 level.
Right.
Sorry?
AV team, any problems?
Okay, sir.
Can I
Done.
Done. Dr. Sosa, you may carry on, please.
Okay, so our main goal is actually of our team is to model pollution at the street scale level. So on the right, you see an example of one of our outputs from our modeling capabilities. Then as the concentrations that you're observing here on the right, you see the impact of highways, you see the impact of street canyon, and you see the impact of the emissions from the arbor in the city of Antwerp. We not only focus on developing accurate air quality modeling capabilities, we also have the intention to do policy support, and we have been doing this in Europe for many years and also in China. And I'd like to mention that we have now pilot projects in Delhi and Bangalore where we are deploying some of our modeling capabilities. But it's also interesting to understand that we not only focus on developing the models, we have a big IT team that develops interesting applications that the users can use to perform air quality forecasts, to do scenario mode analysis, and to do mapping of their own cities. But we are also very focused on innovation, and currently we are looking at the interlink between outdoor and the indoor environment. But the discussion today, it's really about the smart cities and how we can merge sensor data with model data. And that's what I would like to discuss this today. So in the context of India, we understand that there is still a need for further evidence in terms of source identification. So only then you can actually tackle pollution in an efficient manner. So we understand, as was mentioned in the prior presentation, that air quality monitoring stations are quite expensive and they are scarce in India, and also the emissions remain uncertain. But we see an opportunity that is the growing of the number of air quality sensor networks, and that's an opportunity because we can offer a solution by incorporating the output from your sensor networks and our air quality model. And we would like to do that in a way that we can improve the air quality information, we can actually identify pollution sources, and in the end, we should be able to improve the emission inventory by doing this combination. So what we are talking about here is what is called data assimilation. So the idea is to combine an air quality dispersion model with the sensor network. And the question is, can we obtain a better air quality information even if the sensors are low cost and not so accurate? So we need to understand what is the impact of sensor accuracy. But our final goal is really, can we identify new or correct emission sources that we were not aware of? So if you think that data assimilation is something that it's quite far-fetched, well, it is not, because we profit from it every day, and the weather forecast is a good example of that. For example, when you perform a weather forecast, you always perform an ensemble of models that have a certain uncertainty. And then on the other side, we have all the Earth observation problems that, in a data assimilation context, they try to come together so that we actually obtain what is called an updated state. And that's actually what we see in the Meteor channel, is already a combination between model and observation. And this data assimilation technique takes into account both model uncertainty and observed uncertainty, so that the final updated state is something that merges both but has a lower uncertainty. So in the context of urban air quality, that's the next step that we are looking forward, is to apply this in the context of high-resolution air quality mapping. So in the context of modeling, you always start by an emission database, and you see here an example of all the traffic sources that we have in Antwerp, and we acknowledge that they have some uncertainty. This is what I represent here on the left. So to actually understand the importance of that uncertainty, we can propagate this uncertainty towards our concentration maps. And then at the sensor locations, we can actually compare now the results of our model and our observations. we acknowledge the uncertainty of the model and the uncertainty of the observations. And now what we can do is the following step is the data assimilation step, where based on this difference, we go and update the air quality model, but we also do a following step where we actually also update the emission inventory. So in the end, we end up with an updated state where the concentration map is improved, but also we are able to update the information on the emissions. So I'd like to show you now an example that we are applied in a test case in a Chinese city. And what you see here on the left is the output from two sensors. You see the blue, it's the line from our dispersion air quality model. And in yellow, you see the output of the sensor. And you see that, okay, in some cases, our model is quite capable of predicting the air quality path. But at a particular locations, the peak is not well captured, and that's because there's particularly some emissions that were not initially taken into account in our emission database. So if you look at the air quality map, on the left, that's a PM 2.5 concentration map, and on the right, I'll show you the input that was used as a surface emission for this test case. But directly you see that by the size of this circles, this represents the pollution level, the concentration level of PM 2.5, and you see that the high level of concentration very localized. So when we actually do this data assimilation step, we are able to indeed correct the concentration map, and you see an example of the concentration map in this area, but we are also able to modify the surface emission in the sense that initially we had such a initial guess of what was our emission, but after we do the updated step, we can actually identify now a zone where that is responsible for this high peak. So in a way, it's also a way to identify spatially and temporally sources that were unknown at the beginning. So our approach is that if we run this for continuous time, for 1 year, 2 years, you can actually now update your emission inventory in a sense that you end up with a better database, so that you actually can do now scenario analysis and you can better tackle these sources of pollution. So I'd like just to conclude the presentation by the takeaways of what we have developed and presented here. So we understand that indeed sensor networks can be integrated in models to improve air quality information, but we need to acknowledge that both model and sensors have uncertainties, and these need to be properly quantified so that we can do a proper data assimilation procedure. Our approach actually allows an online update of the pollution maps, but also of the emission database. So we can identify in real time the time and spatial temporal zones of high or low emissions. For example, with the lockdown, the data assimilation is a way to correct our database based on the data assimilation step. If we use this procedure over long periods of time, there's the potential to finally improve the emission database. And now what we believe is the impact for the city action plans. We can now identify where hotspots exist and what particular sector-specific sources, the measures that can be taken to tackle those sources. And now decision makers can prioritize the most effective measures at the correct locations to reduce the citizens' exposure. If you are interested to know more about our modeling capabilities and our data assimilation, please feel free to contact me or one of my business developer colleagues. In particular, Jende is our contact in India. So feel free to do that, and I'm happy to take any further questions now or later. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Sousa, for your presentation. Dr. Harab, would you like to go next?
Hello, happy to try. How long have I? Can you let me share my slides? Ah, good. Okay. Good. Right, can you see those? Can you see my slides?
Yes, Dr. Arab, they're clearly visible.
Oh, good, fine. So I'm coming at it from a different direction, not so much the monitoring of the pollution as the medium-term things that can be done about it in a more radical way. My company is, we are analysts. There are about 50 of us, and the sort of PhD level multilingual people going around the world trying to understand the technologies and the business opportunities. So we're analysts, and this is our independent view of some of the opportunities. The radical thing to say is that cities, in science, we do now see ways in which cities can be independent in water, food, and energy. There are so many ways. I, in this time frame, can only touch on a few. But for example, aquaponics is where you combine growing food with growing vegetables as food with fish as food, and they feed off each other. And that is a fast-growing business around the world. Another one is in Germany and Singapore. There's considerable progress on growing genuine milk and meat, where a few cells can create 80,000 tons. Why do I say these things? Well, both of those are examples of radically reducing pollution, because the pollution in many countries from agriculture is greater than from direct traffic and so on. And so to take a few more examples, in terms of cities becoming independent in clean water, which is a very important thing at the moment, as you know, some of the things that are coming on very fast is to have recycling of all of the water. You never throw away any. And you do it with photovoltaic power, which is entirely zero emissions. And the Bill Gates and Melinda Gates Foundation, for instance, is working on no sewerage disposal, which is a massive pollutant. Even carrying sewerage in pipes or trucks is massively polluting. And you treat the sewerage at the facility in the building. So these have huge gains in pollution. And there are many other things, such as absorbent rain gardens throughout cities as we make them more green, because the plants can clean up pollution. And those absorbent rain gardens are called bioswales. Now, I could in each case add 20 more examples, but in the short time available, energy independence, I think, is probably ahead of the other two. Cities being energy independent is, I wouldn't say easy, but happening, progressing extremely rapidly. Solar power is so cheap now, it's going to be everywhere. Probably the last thing is solar roads, although there are about 10 projects on those, but solar walking ways, plazas and buildings, solar on the sides now is cost effective, and there are about 4 technologies for that, and lightweight, and windows. There is some adoption of that, but it's very inefficient and less rapid. But most cities, of the big cities, are on the sea, and the sea is rising. So we're taking more attention to making our power from tidal wave power, but without enormous concrete structures for dams in rivers and so on, because concrete causes 8% of global warming. No, these are virtually without any infrastructure. You put your big turbine in the sea and it's just on its own, and you can relocate it to another country. If you sell it to someone, it's not got massive infrastructure, and these are proving very efficient in many parts of the world now. And similarly with wave power, so that they can be installed in about an hour and sold to someone else later and so on. You can get finance for them because they are a tradable product. And dams on rivers that are drying up are not looking very clever right now. Airborne wind energy is tethered drones and so on. That is being progressed. SpaceX says it will have a major success in 2 years. Well, we'll have to see. But everything I'm talking about is zero emission. And I'm going to give you some examples of the smart city of the future, much of which is happening today. But in my talk, I'm going to mention smart transport and 6G communications as having major contributions to pollution reduction as well. So here is one example. It's not meant to be a pretty design of a city of the future. It's just a way of putting down a lot of things that are happening. The work by Sharp with Toyota on putting all over the body of a vehicle and later buildings 3-5 compounds, multi-junction, 3-junction photovoltaics, normally seen on upper atmosphere drones that are intended to stay up for 5 years, beam the internet to us, and also on satellites. That's coming to Earth. It's being tested on cars. And this is massively saving in energy. For instance, my wife has a Toyota, my wife has a car, and the head of our Japan office has a car. They both do only 11,000 kilometers a year. If they bought one of the solar cars available now with single crystal silicon even on the sides, and there are several of them, they would never plug in. So this isn't really dreaming about a distant future. It's what you could do today. There are cars you can buy that never plug in, because charging stations and their sources of electricity can be pollution issues and delay the adoption of electric vehicles. So quite radical things are happening. To touch on a few more things you see in front of you, that whole walkway, cities are banning cars. They're bringing in robot vehicles, these robot shuttles that are multi-purpose, more of that in a minute. But the actual walkways, Platio in Hungary has a solar plaza that can charge your car, and it can be a walkway that generates a great deal of electricity. And the developments of that are versions that de-ice themselves in winter and do all sorts of other multifunctionality. So I won't talk more about all those things in the time available, but we're going to see much more growing of vegetables in salty marsh areas and saline farming in the sea of fish and vegetables, and a whole string of multifunctionality in buildings and so on. So I rest my case. We are moving, and a lot of this is available already, to a lot of things that can completely eliminate this source of pollution, that source of pollution, another source of pollution. So I think it's an exciting future that's ahead of us. So I'm going to finish with a little bit about some of the information technologies coming in. The dream of 6G that we've been looking at is that Samsung thinks it'll roll out in 2030. We change our radio telephony about every 10 years. As you know, we're all slowly adopting 5G now, and 6G, another 10 years, will come out, and surprise, surprise, it'll be at much higher frequencies, because that's how you get much more data that you can transfer, and you can do holographs from your phone, and to a human perception, instant downloads of enormous amounts of data and all those great benefits, many more I could go into. But this time it's being designed as something fundamentally not simply radio telephony for IoT and your phone. It is, from its basic design, supposed to enable sensors everywhere, positioning to better than 1 centimeter, and it to do that has to use very difficult beams which are far infrared. It's terahertz frequency. There's not much technology available. A lot of the big companies in the world are investing huge amounts. About $1 billion was invested last year. The Chinese sent up a satellite to do look at the physics in using space as a simplified environment, physics of all this. But it's intended that it makes the Internet of Things not something that's merely millions or tens of millions of nodes a year, but genuinely billions. And it will only happen with these feeble beams if you have smart surfaces on buildings, all the way up skyscrapers, on the ceiling in your home, on the side of a truck, on a billboard, and so on. And these have to use metamaterials because you don't want to focus the beam, aim the beam, and so on, using moving parts. It's too expensive. So the new metamaterials and basically structural electronics using multi-layers of different printed electronics. So I think it's a big if whether this can be pulled off. If it can be pulled off, in its developed form, it will actually charge a mobile phone and let you use devices that have no power supply. The disposal of batteries is a massive pollution issue. So it would be very interesting if sensor friends and so on could be operating without any power supply, but believe it when you see it. So I think the robot vehicles are worth a look, because that's one of the ways in which you don't just ban cars and private cars in the middle of cities, which saves enormous pollution, but you actually make something that is so multi-purpose and so intensively used. You press a button and it goes yellow and says school bus. You press another button and it goes brown and says UPS. And the Toyota e-Palette Smart City, they call it the woven smart city at the base of Mount Fuji that they're going to build. These are their pictures on the left and right. And as you can see, they see it converting as a mobile restaurant, mobile library, and many other things. That employs a lot of very exciting materials science that makes it more efficient. And there's a bit there, and I won't read it all out to you, but that could hugely reduce pollution, because even if you have tremendous traffic congestion with battery electric cars, you create the particulate pollution we've been hearing about from the tires. They still have tires. It's not as much, nothing like as much, but it's still significant. And the same thing with railway systems. They create those particulates from the wheels, the steel wheels. So there's a broad scope that I hope has excited some interest from you. Already some of these robot shuttles being tested in 30 countries are made by 3D printing entirely, which is much more energy efficient and so on. Already one of them has done a deal with one of the solar car companies to do structural solar as the whole body makes electricity. Others are working on the whole of the body as a supercapacitor. Well, you could do both of those things. You could have the photovoltaics on top of the supercapacitor layer. So enormously exciting things happening. And I'm not really talking about a long time from now. I'm talking about these are projects that are well underway already. So that's us. I hope that's a little taster that's useful, and we'll give you an extended version of these slides if you'd like, but in the time available I've tried to just give you a taster. Okay, we can take questions if you wish to.
Thank you, Dr. Aaron. That was indeed a true eye-opener of a presentation. I have a question, if I may put it to you.
Good, yes.
So based on the presentation that you gave, all these radical ideas presented us as the presentation was from more of a conceptual point of view in terms of the concept and how it's possible. Is your research also involved in its in that concept's viability from a financial perspective?
Oh yes, yes, absolutely, yes. But a lot of these things, pollution is so serious, it's not, viability is not something you take in isolation. We have reports on smart cities we've looked at all over the world, including in India, and reports on the robot shuttles. And for example, in all these examples, often a starting point is a smart city. They say we are going to ban private cars, okay? And others say, like London, we're going to make it absolute hell for any car that emits pollution. We won't ban them, but you won't want one. So then you have a very rigged market. And then you can look at economics as within those boundary conditions, what is the most viable thing. So when we look at the economics, we think the people who are doing robot shuttles that only take 6 people are wrong, because you get a much faster payback and benefit in pollution and everything else. You have ones that are like most of them, which is, including standing, taking about 20 people. So you can do all that, but the viability of it often relies on the smart city making some tough decisions about private cars and so on.
Understood. Thank you for the clarification, Dr. Har. I now hand over the proceedings to Ms. Bharti.
Thank you, Divyank. So hello everyone, good evening. This is Bharti Singla from Chakra Innovation. We are a group of engineers, graduates from various IITs who got together on a mission to solve the problem of air pollution through technological interventions. And I think, as we've seen through the sessions, all of us agree that air pollution is a huge problem and needs to be solved. So I'm going to start our introduction of what we do at Chakra with this picture that you see on the screen, which says breathe. So this breathe is actually not written with normal paint. It's written with the exact thing which is not letting a lot of people breathe. It's written with the PM 2.5, which all of us spoke about. So we've converted that into black paint, and that is what has been used to write this. Now, talking about the problem, I just wanted to stress on why it is so important and why PM 2.5 in particular is such a huge concern. So if you look at the most polluted cities in the world, 18 out of those are located in India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh. So South Asia is a very, very important region for us to solve the problem of air pollution for. If you look at research that has been done around the world, 92% of Asia and the Pacific population are exposed to air pollution, right? And that is an alarming number. That is an alarming figure, because air pollution is responsible for a lot of diseases. Now, if you look at the sources of this pollution, there are various sources, and I think we've seen a lot of methodologies for source apportionment. And I'm going to quote some data from some source apportionments that have been done in the past, which show that diesel generators are a contributor to air pollution in major cities. So when we look at the urban cities in India, like Bangalore, Delhi, Faridabad, Chennai, Gurgaon, diesel generators have a double-digit contribution in most cases to the PM 2.5 in the air. And this is the problem we decided to tackle first, because there were no viable solutions available at that point for the diesel generators being used in the developing world. So we've come up with a product that basically captures 70 to 90% of the particulate matter that is being emitted from diesel generators. So our product is basically a retrofit device that fits on top of the diesel generators. It captures 70 to 90% of the PM hydrocarbons as well as carbon monoxide that is coming out of the diesel generators. We are able to do that without consuming a lot of energy, so we use less than 1% energy, and without causing any back pressure on the engine, which is one of the largest concerns that comes up when you talk about a retrofit device. The product is also very, very user-friendly. It has no consumables, no filters which need to be replaced. It's self-regenerating on its own and has a long life. So just to show you all the impact that it can create, I've just zoomed into a picture. On the left side is a sample filter paper which was collected from the exhaust before the device was installed, which has turned black. And on the right side is the same kind of filter paper which was put in the exhaust when our device was installed. So that is the impact that it is able to create. Just to quantify it in terms of the numbers, and again this is a test result from one of the 5 labs which is authorized to do these tests. We are able to reduce the PM by 85%, hydrocarbon by 94%, and carbon monoxide by 95%. So that's the kind of reduction we are able to achieve with each installation that we do. Now, as Professor Tripathi spoke about the National Clean Air Plan, I also wanted to touch upon that because that is something, you know, which ties in the whole narrative. That you can find out what are the important sources of pollution, you can find the technological innovations to solve it, but there is a requirement for you to marry the technology and the data to policy to ensure that it is implemented. And as Dr. Harap also mentioned, right, so cost is not just the financial cost, it's also the cost of pollution to the environment being caused. So the National Clean Air Plan, and which Dr. Tripathi spoke about, has actually recognized diesel generators as an important source and has again suggested 2 methods to solve this problem of diesel generators, either to retrofit it with an emission control device or to switch to cleaner fuels. And that has further been sort of ratified by the National Green Tribunal. So National Green Tribunal is the apex court in India for all the environment related matters, and that requires now all diesel generators in the country to be retrofitted. Now, talking about our work, so you know, we started this in 2016 when there was no regulation, and we've managed to be very fortunate in terms of getting a lot of large corporates who were interested in being sustainable to install this device. So we've installed it across various capacities, starting from 25 kVA all the way up to 2000 kVA. We've also done installations in the most extreme environments. So we have done one installation in Leh at almost minus 18 degrees Celsius, and then one installation in Chennai and all the other cities where the temperatures are also very high. So these installations have been running successfully for over the last 2.5 to 3 years, reducing the emissions quite effectively. Now, what I would also like to do is show everyone a quick video of the impact that our device can create. And again, this is the same installation which is in Leh. So I will play the video. Maybe the sound might not be audible to everyone because it doesn't go through the presentation, but I will just walk you through it. So currently the diesel generator is running. You will be able to see that, you know, the air here is moving because of the hot temperature, right? But you cannot see any pollution. So this is when the exhaust is passing through our device. And now my team member is going to turn the wheel here and shift it to the silencer. The silencer is the normal path through which the exhaust would be passing out from a diesel generator. And now you can see actually the smoke that was coming out, which the device was able to capture. Of building many more such products which are going to cater to various sources of pollution. So as we keep identifying the sources of pollution which are creating an issue, we can keep developing products that can be used to control those sources, that pollution at source. So I will stop here in case there are any questions. Happy to answer those.
Hi, Bharti. Thank you so much for your presentation. It is indeed a really needed invention for countries like India, where pollution from diesel energy sources is really high, and it remains at an all-time high throughout the year. My first question regarding this product is, can you walk us through its working principle?
Sure. So it is a device that basically fits on top of a diesel generator. It has 3 parts. The first part is the oxidation chamber, where basically all the gases as well as the soluble particulate matter is converted into its oxidized form so that it doesn't remain harmful. The second part is where the capturing of the particulate matter happens. So the particulate matter is captured in the second part, which is again designed with extensive computational fluid dynamics to ensure that the back pressure is minimal, whereas the efficiency is high. So that is what we've optimized in our product, which is one of the biggest concerns for a retrofit device. Now, this second part where the capturing takes place is also self-regenerating. So it has certain chemicals and certain electromagnetic waves-based systems which are able to regenerate this capturing part, so that there is no clogging, there's nothing which gets choked. And once the regeneration happens, you have a clean filter again to just carry out the process as it goes on. So that's broadly the working principle of our device.
And it does sound fairly complicated, and yet you claim that you've been able to make this product cost effective.
Yes, I mean, obviously cost effective is always a relative term. We've made it cost effective at the current stage, but I think there is always scope for improvement. And as we scale, as more and more people install this, and as we achieve the economies of scale, the cost will come down further.
Right, and keeping this retrofit fashion in mind, can something similar be worked out for, let's say, diesel commercial vehicles for that matter?
Yes, absolutely, Divyank. I think that is something which can be done, and we all need to be cognizant of the fact that while the world will shift towards EVs, commercial vehicles are going to take a long time to do that, and we do have a lot of BS4 commercial vehicles which are going to continue to fly and pollute, and this can be further optimized, miniaturized to retrofit it on commercial vehicles as well.
All right. Thank you so much, Bharti. Fellow panelists, I'm afraid we've run out of time for this session, so we'll have to end the session now.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for
everyone.
Thanks.
Thank you. Bye.
I do hope everyone had a wonderful time listening to all the presentations. And in fact, I'd like to make a small request that if you could share all your detailed presentations with us, so that we can share them with fellow speakers from other summits as well.
Sure.
Of course. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Take care. Good day.